Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 34 of What to Think, the technology news podcast from VentureBeat.com. My name is Dylan Tweeney. I'm the editor of VentureBeat. I'm here with
Jordan Oved, lowly writer.
An excellent writer, and nice coming in right on cue, Jordan. I appreciate that. That's just one of the many examples of how this podcast is such a well-oiled machine. Today, we're going to be talking to Tim Guleri, an investor with Sierra Ventures, and Stephen Hillion, the chief product officer at Alpine Data Labs. They are big data experts, and we're going to talk to them about big data and what all that means. But first, let's talk about some tech news highlights from VentureBeat. I've picked out three of our most interesting and popular stories from the last week. Let's start with Windows 10. I get this reaction a lot when I talk about Windows, sometimes in the newsroom, sometimes up and down, Highway 101 in Silicon Valley. People are like, Windows, that's so yesterday. Microsoft is dying. But the fact is, Windows is huge. There are millions and millions of Windows computers out there. Windows 10, which is the next version to be coming, we'll get more specific details in January, is undoubtedly going to be used by millions and millions of people. Many will upgrade. It will show up on many Windows tablets and computers everywhere. And then we've got a little bit more of a peek at it.
The most interesting thing that we have in this story is Cortana is showing up more visibly, not only for mobile phones, but for desktops.
Yes. Now, Cortana is the interactive voice assistant, right? She's named after a character in Halo.
Well, I think it's not too bad. And I will note that Google has brought Google Now, their virtual assistant, to the desktop.
Yes, where you say, okay, Google.
Exactly.
And the Chrome browser responds.
It's not completely surprising. It does show Microsoft is thinking about cross-platform development of essentially a tool that should span whatever device you're using.
Yes. And Microsoft has been putting even some advertising into promoting how much smarter Cortana is than Siri. And,
Do you believe it?
No, I don't believe it for a second. I think it will take some time for them to iron out the kinks in Cortana, just as it has taken Apple quite a lot of time to iron out the kinks in Siri. And it's still not there. I mean, I still find Siri very limiting.
Well, maybe you should use Google Now. It's not that bad.
Google Now is okay as long as I'm just doing straight searches. I bring up the search bar, I say, okay, Google, and then I say the name of a restaurant. It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. I don't have any problem with that. Whether you'll be able to use something like that, like Cortana, Microsoft is thinking to do with Cortana to, open documents or compose emails or what have you from your computer, I don't know.
Send a message on Yammer to your colleagues at work.
Exactly.
That would be useful.
There was an interesting note at the end of this story by Mark Sullivan about Windows 10 saying there's some Twitter chatter suggesting that Windows 10 will also support hand gestures and 3D stereo headsets. 3D stereo, great. But hand gestures, the Xbox technology, I'm looking forward to that, just waving.
So what do? You wave to send a message to your boss?
Yeah.
Whoosh, on the desktop.
Exactly. And you shake your hands like this.
Undo.
No, undo. That's undo.
You could hit the OK sign to save.
Yeah, exactly. We could come up with all kinds of ridiculous gestures, which, if they're smart, the Microsoft engineers will completely ignore.
You said that, I didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on to other brilliant ideas. We posted a guest article by Tom Bice, who's with Attachmate, which is part of Novell, about Facebook at Work, which is Facebook's new kind of enterprise-focused. We're going to let you collaborate with your coworkers using Facebook as the secure platform.
Isn't this something that Facebook should have been doing, by the way, about 5 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, he points out that really what would have made sense for them is to be battling LinkedIn to become the social network that you use as your professional identity, which I'm actually quite thankful that Facebook is not that. I like Facebook to be my kind of separate, private, family, and true friends space, and LinkedIn is my resume.
Okay.
Right? But Tom Bice makes a good point, which is that Facebook could make itself and your profile into kind of your professional profile and your professional social network if it wanted. But that's not what it's doing with Facebook at Work. It's a collaboration platform, which is crazy. It makes no sense.
If you were to give it 4 or 5 years, though, and a big marketing budget, it might be something that eventually could spin out and get bought by someone else or be a real revenue generator for Facebook. No, you don't think so? You're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head. Our columnist makes a really good comparison here. He says in the 90s, the magazine Cosmopolitan, decided that it was the perfect time for them to release a yogurt brand and start selling yogurt, because they're like, oh, Cosmo readers, they all eat yogurt and yogurt is healthy and we've got a great brand. People would love to buy Cosmo yogurt. Of course, it flopped miserably because they have no idea how to sell yogurt. It's a completely different thing than making a magazine. And I think Facebook is going to discover the same thing.
Well, maybe Facebook should just buy one of these existing enterprise social networks, because they're there. They're all over the place. And Microsoft and what other companies, VMware, have bought their way into this market as well.
Yeah, right.
Facebook really wants to be in the business collaboration area, just like people send chat messages to one another.
I don't think
Facebook.
Anybody is going to nobody in the enterprise is going to take Facebook seriously.
Just give it 20 years.
In 20 years, all 7 billion people on the planet will be wired into Facebook through brain chips, and at that point, it'll be inevitable. I'll give you that, Jordan.
They already have advertising money. Maybe it's just a few more years, and you could get.
I think that's actually that's the nub of it, is because Facebook is an advertising-supported business. Their entire business is predicated on getting information about you so they can target ads to you. And that's completely different than what enterprise buyers' priorities are, which are security and stability and reliability.
Just think of how much better ads would be if every single one of your company's employees has to use Facebook. Like really good ads. Better and better.
Let's talk about Facebook. As long as we're complaining about Facebook, I just want to point out, we're going now to the third story of the week that I'd like to highlight. We are right on trend with complaining about Facebook. According to some research done by VB Insight, which is our marketing arm of VentureBeat, people complain about various brands 879 million times a year using Twitter, Facebook, and other social media networks.
How many times have you complained this year about it?
Oh my God, I complain daily about brands because, I really don't care. And I'm in that 10% of people who find something to be angry about publicly every single day. But the most complained about brand?
What is it?
Facebook.
Really?
That's the one we complain about the most, apparently.
What about other brands? I complain about other brands.
I'm sure you do on Facebook. But
sometimes.
Apparently one of the favorite things for people to do on Facebook is complain about Facebook.
Kind of meta there. Now, the interesting thing in this study is there are some brands that respond very quickly to complainers and others don't. And actually, this article has the worst brands at social media, quote unquote, support. I'll just read them out and you can kind of nod your head.
Okay.
Comcast, Walmart, Verizon, Apple, Kraft, Microsoft, Delta, and Amazon.
Ouch. Well, Walmart has a decent customer service reputation, I guess, but Comcast, Verizon, Delta.
Maybe it's just that there's too many complaints. If there were fewer, then maybe it'd be easier to respond to. But I mean, look, there's a long tail in this graph of most complained to brands. Facebook is far and away the largest with
by far the
20%
biggest.
here. And it kind of goes down to 5% with Twitter, around 4%, Instagram, Zynga, Walmart, Google. They all get smaller.
Right.
Facebook does a pretty good job, actually, it looks like.
The challenge, obviously, if you're a brand or a brand manager at one of these companies, is to figure out when people are complaining about you and respond appropriately or, in some way. Maybe you can't solve everyone's customer service problem, but you should be responsive, because if people are bitching about you on Twitter, you're going to want to respond on Twitter somehow and show that you care.
I think it's interesting that Facebook and Twitter are not on the worst brands list. They're escaping that designation.
Probably because they actually respond.
And they use Twitter, use Facebook.
Because they invented the dang platform, so they know how to do it. Yeah. Well, let that be a lesson to you. Many people are complaining about social media or using social media, and that's where you got to go if you want to find those complaints and respond to them. We're going to go to our guests in a minute, but first I'd like to take a second to thank the host and sponsor of this podcast, newly public company New Relic, which is a software analytics company that makes sense of billions of data points about millions of applications in real time. It is a comprehensive SaaS-based software analytics platform that empowers developers, IT, and business leaders to transform their business by using real-time data directly from production software. And now let's go to our guests, Tim Guleri and Stephen Hillion. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jordan, tell us why you brought these gentlemen into the studio today.
Well, I wrote a story earlier this year about ways that data scientists can work together. And I mentioned Alpine as a startup that gives multiple people inside of a company access to tools to explore data. And I like it more than other tools, if I'm allowed to say so.
You are.
Because, thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Stephen, you would say that, being the Alpine guy.
I'm sure the VC would say that too.
I love it.
Because it gives people who are not data scientists the ability to do stuff with data. And so I just wanted to explore that more. And I think because we have both of you, maybe we can just start off by finding out how you ended up getting involved with Alpine in the first place, why you wanted to invest, and why you think it's a good bet.
Firstly, thanks for the invite. This is exciting to be in the studio with you folks, and I don't get to talk about this enough with Stephen in the room, so a pleasure to be here. I joined Sierra 13 years ago, and we're an early stage venture capital firm principally focused on the enterprise space. So we focused on the $4 trillion that's spent annually on enterprise stuff, which is complicated and deep, as you know. And kind of the history of big data at Sierra was well before my time because we funded the granddaddy of big data, which is Teradata.
Before they even called it big data.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. It was probably tiny data or complicated data.
Or we just called it data back then, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I came to Sierra, we have a CIO council, which we talk to these guys all the time on what's the burning pain. And one of the CIOs talked about the Teradata tax, which is, typically you're paying $20-30 million a year and don't have options.
For hardware.
For hardware and software, it's an appliance, right?
Of course.
So that led to sort of a bit of research, and I ended up funding a company called Greenplum, which was open source, software-based company solving the problem of data analysis and analytics. And that's where Stephen and I met for the second time because he and I know each other from Scopus, which is a company I was an engineer at back in 1992.
Oh, wow.
Big, long history. And
They weren't doing big data back then, were they?
No, call center automation. But the lesson that we learned at Greenplum, the journey at Greenplum, which was successfully sold to EMC for $400 million, was that was sort of the first layer of the cake. And if you look at the enterprise problem, which is the reason they buy these big data boxes and analytics, is to really solve the business question. So at Greenplum, we had funded a small project off balance sheet to solve that particular problem in China, believe it or not.
Okay.
Because China didn't have analytics market, and we did this little project off on the side, and that was having great success in China. When Greenplum got sold to EMC,
What year was this?
this is 2000.
Okay.
No, 2010.
2010, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to, okay. Yeah, all right.
2000, that old, yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah. And so we ended up taking this project, spinning it out of EMC, and then funding it with Sierra's capital and Mission Ventures, who were the two people that came together in the Greenplum financing. And that's when we got Stephen to take this fresh platform and solve the problem of what would analytics look like when you were sitting on big data, if you were to design it from the ground up for the next couple of decades. So start with a clean sheet of paper and go from there.
I want to back up for a second and ask Stephen now a question in terms of big data. You've been involved in data, it sounds like, for many years, since before it was called big data.
For sure.
Is there a qualitative difference between the kind of data we used to talk about before we had that term and what we talk about now when we say, quote unquote, big data?
There is a qualitative difference as opposed to purely a quantitative one because relatively small data sets that I worked on, say, in the retail world, or even going back to my CRM days where you'd build reports and dashboards, you could kind of grok the data yourself just by looking at it. I mean, not literally. You still got potentially millions of rows, but, it kind of fit in an Excel spreadsheet. You could write queries against it. You could kind of get your head around it. I think one of the things that people don't always recognize around big data is that it's so big, you actually need advanced methods even to understand what the content of the data is. Being able to sort of reduce the number of dimensions or being able to sort of summarize what's in billions of rows is a pretty hard problem by itself. So for me, big data is not just handling very large data sets, but it's actually the application of advanced methods in order to tease out what's hidden in this sort of huge amount of data. So that to me is, aside from the quantitative difference, the fundamental difference difference is that it's harder to get meaning out of it because it is so big. And
You don't even know where to look somehow, right?
That's right. You have like long tails, for example. You often have many, many columns. If you're doing like clickstream analysis, often you'll have literally like thousands of columns of data. It's like, how do you even get your head around that?
Mm-hmm.
I actually was in New York last week, and I spoke with someone in software who is deserving of much respect. That's Joel Spolsky, who was a program manager for Microsoft Excel and created Fog Creek software, which came out with Trello, which I'm a huge fan of. And I asked him, do you want to do data science stuff on all the data that people are putting in Trello, all the cards of things that they need to do for a given day? And he said, no, we don't think that this is an important thing. First, because it depends on how they want to make money, I think. And they don't want to do advertisements, for one thing. So it doesn't make sense to mine words. But he said, if you as a human being can't look at the data yourself and start to make conclusions, it doesn't always make sense to think if you just apply some machine learning algorithm, you're going to improve things. Big data originates with smaller data, and you should feel confident in your own ability to look at things and find patterns.
That's interesting. I would say, I mean, just off the top of my head, I just, without even thinking of all the interesting use cases we work on at Alpine, sort of health research and sort of climatological research and finance and so on. I just think of the way that I can spend a weekend playing around with Google Ngrams or just typing things into the search ahead box on Google. It's like, that's pretty interesting itself. There's no way I could grok all of that that search data, and Google has done that for me. And look how interesting that is. People write whole blogs about, what happens when you type why is San Francisco so...
Right.
I type in the name of this podcast, What to Think. If you type it into Google, one of the first things that it auto-completes after that is what to think about during sex. I don't know why it's saying that. Maybe it's something I search for. I don't know. But you're right. Coming up with those autocompletes is a huge, there's a huge data problem behind that, right? But it's completely transparent to us.
Yeah, that's right. The Trello example is a really interesting one. I mean, you can look at this two different ways. First of all, we actually use Trello internally for sort of keeping...
Doesn't everyone?
Yeah, of course. But also, as you indicated in your introductory remarks, we build a collaborative application. So we actually allow people to attach, documents and comments and sort of version control and so on around their analytics. We're not just about the analytics, we're about the people and the community around that. And we actually have now started to mine that data so that you can ask questions like, what's the most frequently used data set? That's an easy one, right? Or perhaps a little bit more challenging. If I'm going to be building a churn model, what data sets and variables should I be using, and what are the standard transformations I can apply? So if you can actually apply data science to data science...
I'm impressed. I like it. I like the idea.
When you're looking at companies that you're considering investing in, like Alpine Data Lab, obviously big data is a huge potential market, a lot of opportunity in kind of defining the problem set and building these layers upon which analytics can happen. What makes one company stand out relative to another when you in this field?
I think there'll be many, many successful companies on top of the big data layer, and obviously the orientation you take, the DNA of the founding team, and what sort of initial problem they got to going on is the difference between a class of company on top of big data versus another. And our thesis, and I love at Sierra, and that's the reason we're very excited about Alpine, is that if you look at the enterprise problem, so, one has to be very clear about what you are and what you're not. So what Alpine is all about is taking deep problems that are the question that large companies ask, like insurance companies and telcos and banks. And these are people that have hundreds of data scientists, all locked in different closets, triple PhDs that don't talk to each other. And the idea is those questions are being asked. How do you actually build a fabric of software? Which is what Stephen was alluding to, which is this notion of collaboration on the collaboration itself, as in like how do you analyze the actual use of the data sets that people are then building questions and analytics on to eventually solve the business problem. So that was the DNA of the company, and it's a company that has taken a very sort of first couple of years we were just building the core product, and now you're seeing every quarter we're starting to close 10, 20, 25 transactions with the best brands in the world.
Like what?
That is these would be, the Morgan Stanleys of the world, and even companies like BlackBerry that are trying to do a comeback. Banks, telcos, Telecom Mobile Italia is another one in Italy, for instance. So these are different verticals that have always spent money in advanced analytics, but never had a framework or a product that was built for the enterprise that allowed for this collaboration and the asking of interesting questions. My point being, that's the DNA of the company, going after the enterprise problem. And I think in the last 30 years, SaaS and SPSS were the only companies that played in this market. And our job is to eat the lunch, and which is kind of the path we're on.
Well, there was something funny that happened earlier this year. A little company called Microsoft came out with something called Azure Machine Learning.
Yep.
Why don't you actually just tell me what you think about it, Stephen? Because I think it's formidable competition, A, because they do quite a bit of business in enterprises, and B, because it's actually a functioning product that data scientists I know actually give some respect to. They like it from a theoretical point of view.
Yeah.
Or they've tried it out and they've had some fun with it.
Oh, I think it's great. And I think you're beginning to see this proliferation, especially on the cloud side, actually, of people doing advanced analytics on data that's residing outside of sort of on-premise data. I think, however, in the end, most data scientists don't want to be tied to just one tool, and they don't want to be tied to just one data platform. So, one of the things that I think data scientists have felt trapped by until recently is that they have difficulty getting access to the data in the first place. I would argue, actually, that's one of the big problems. It's not about whose algorithm is best and which model runs fastest. It's about how can I get my hands on the data in the first place in the most iterative and agile way possible. So I think the first thing you want is you want a platform that works on-premise and can also work in the cloud, and interoperable in a very fast and easy way with pretty much every data set you can imagine.
Sure.
Whether that's NoSQL or Hadoop or traditional relational databases. I think that's key.
Speed is not something we're accustomed to hearing about when we talk about big data analysis, though, right? I mean, it's my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got terabytes of data in a Hadoop store, it can take minutes or hours to get reasonable search results back. Is that correct?
It's true. I mean, I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about speed, but you're right. You're not talking about millisecond sort of times here, except when you're talking about sort of scoring data sets. You want to score a customer for churn or for their response on a website or something like that. But we do spend a lot of time thinking about it because that difference between, say, days or hours or minutes is pretty critical. I think, I sometimes joke that SaaS has contributed perhaps to nicotine addiction more than any other company, because you're so used to, kicking off your algorithm, then you go out and have a cigarette break, and then you go and figure out that it didn't work, and so you go out, reset the parameters, and go and have another cigarette break, and it's kind of a disaster. But
I thought Hadoop did the same exact thing.
Well, Hadoop hasn't necessarily improved things, which is why Spark is so great, right? Because it's going to help speed things up a lot, and I think we should all watch that very carefully. And it's already beginning to take off. Everybody's talking about it now, and rightly so. So it's true that you're not talking about super fast stuff, but I think one of the things that we've seen repeatedly at most of our customer sites is fundamentally a change, partly because of the collaborative nature of what we're doing, but partly because also we're making this much more accessible, is you now have conversations where the business will come in real time and say, you built this model for product recommendations using all of our transaction data. Could we use stuff off of our website to help enrich that model? So if we can see what people have recently been searching for, surely that's going to help us make product recommendations. Oh, never even thought about that. Well, let me go out and grab that data. So if you have that access to the business, access to different data sets, and access to the data science team directly, then those iteration times become much more rapid. So that's where speed really does count.
Yeah. So in fact, I just want to give a quick example, because I talked to our customer Morgan Stanley a couple of weeks ago, and they had a very interesting sort of anecdote on the speed question, which is not to do with when you click the button go, what happens and how fast did the engine come back, which is obviously much, much faster than before. But this guy said once he had set the infrastructure, so this particular customer is in one part of the bank, but once they set the infrastructure up, they had to deal with IT because they had to get the right data sources laid out, and that took them, the 3-4 months to do. But once he had done that, he's got a team of about 12, 24 to 35-year-old folks that are PhDs in stats and math and all that stuff. The speed at which they are answering and asking questions now is tenfold. So the point is, once the infrastructure is in place, the speed at which you can actually use the infrastructure without talking to IT is where his biggest bang for the buck was, which I didn't know.
I remember one of the first
very nice to hear.
telco churn models that I built. Everybody builds telco churn models, and we actually built the model, this was some years ago. It would predict not your propensity to cancel your account tomorrow, which would of course be a useful thing to know, but it would predict your propensity to cancel the account in 2 months' time. Because the model took so long to build and to roll out into production, there was no point in predicting what would happen tomorrow. We try to do things a little bit better now.
I imagine that you guys want to make things even more of a self-service service so that if I, as a non-data scientist, want to start hacking around and applying certain algorithms,
Yeah.
I can do it with a few clicks of a button. What can you do to make it easier to use?
So that's certainly something we have focused on right since the beginning of the company with sort of more visual approach. I think other things that we're doing right now is, first of all, creating another layer. So, we have our core algorithms, which are written in, SQL and Scala and MapReduce and so on. And we have a visual layer written over those.
Right.
That's sort of key to what we do. There's another layer on top of that where you begin to ask questions that are phrased much more in sort of business terms. I don't necessarily mean, we already do this, in fact, like, oh, you want to build a churn model, here's how to do it. We already ship out sort of pre-built templates for that sort of thing. But what I mean is, why talk about a logistic regression when in fact you can ask somebody, are you trying to classify something, right? Why talk about k-means when you can ask, oh, you're trying to build sort of segments?
Right.
I think there are sort of more natural language terms that you can use. We actually hired somebody specifically for this job to look at pretty much every single window in our application and say, no, that's too technical. Let's translate that into a different term. So it's almost like an internationalization project, but you're internationalizing it for other users.
Translating it from data sciences into...
Yeah, that's right. But on the other hand, we also acknowledge that in the end, you do need a team of data scientists or people who at least have some training who can help you from, tripping over yourselves and using statistics in an unreasonable way. And what we try to do is partly the collaborative nature of the application. Keep on hearing that theme, of course. It's a big thing for us. But we also have like a call home service that you can very easily from within the application, set up a chat session with one of our data scientists who can advise you on the best way to use the product. We regard it as something of like a learning platform.
Yes, but do you have any deep learning? This is the coolest, most trendy area. And I just wonder if you guys are starting to give people an opportunity to spin up a convolutional neural net on Alpine Data Labs and start to give a bunch of cat pictures and see if they can identify cats. Is that next? Is that a
you're
roadmap?
getting to the important stuff.
That's what I really want to know here.
Recognizing pictures of cats. So yeah, we've had neural nets for some time now. We're actually working on a new version of those, which will be supported on Spark. So yeah, that's already in the product and it's still a continuing part of our roadmap. We have other classification algorithms. We think a world-class random forest. We call it Alpine forest for copyright reasons and to be cute. And we think this is really a fundamental shift in the ability to handle large-scale data with a classification algorithm, essentially at unlimited scale, but in a reasonable amount of time.
Right, so I know you're not the CEO, but when's the IPO?
Tim, I don't know, what should we say? Give us a couple of years, I think.
Couple of years. So the line we use internally is we want to have 100 customers.
Okay.
Who are paying
How many
us
are there now?
In the scores,
Scores, okay.
Yeah, so I'd say 40, 50 in that range. Each customer paying us $1 million a year and 100 of them. That's the goal.
That would be a good business.
That'd be a great business because, it's a very sticky product.
If they used to be spending 20 or 30 million a year, they're probably happy too.
Very happy, and the ROI is phenomenal.
That's
so
right. I mean,
that's how we are configuring the company.
Okay.
Take your time, get customers that matter, and an indication of whether we matter to them is whether they're paying us $1 million, $2 million a year.
Well, we'll bring you guys back after the IPO, okay?
Great.
Absolutely.
Happy to do it.
All right, thanks a lot for joining us in the podcast, guys. I really appreciate it.
Oh, great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, gentlemen.
And that means that we are officially done with What to Think, Dylan. I think that means we'll be seeing people...
Well, not next week because we're going to take a break next week for the holidays, but we'll be back the week after that on December 31st.
Perfect.
When we'll have Gary Shapiro, the CEO of the Consumer Electronics Association, to tell us about what's coming up in the new year and specifically at CES.
Cool.
Until then, you guys can follow us at VentureBeat.com, where we will continue publishing throughout the holidays, probably at a slightly reduced pace of news publication, though. So we'll catch you next time. I'm Dylan Tweeney.
And I'm Jordan Ovett.
Till then.
Bye-bye.